No trees, no fences, no horizon line, but grass, bending under wind that never stops. This is the American interior, west of the 100th meridian, a landscape that looks empty and is anything but forgiving. In summer, it will scorch a field to dust in 6 weeks. In winter, it will drop 50 degrees before sundown. This same ground can flood, burn, and freeze, sometimes in the same year. And yet, in 1862, the United States government offered this land away for free. 160 acres to any citizen willing to live on it, farm it, and survive 5 straight years. Prove it in 5 years of continuous residence, or pay a small sum after just 6 months and call it yours. On paper, it was the simplest bargain imaginable. On the ground, it was almost nothing like the brochures promised. The 160-acre plot was a number borrowed from Ohio, from Illinois, wet, wooded, forgiving country. Out here, past the 100th meridian, rainfall drops below 20 inches a year. The math simply didn't hold. Families who staked their claim found no lumber to build with, no fence line, no well already dug, and often no neighbor within 10 miles. Whatever shelter they needed, they would have to build from the dirt beneath their own boots. So they built with the only material the plains gave them, turf itself, thick bricks of grass and root cut straight from the ground and stacked into walls 2 feet deep. They called it a soddy. Some, only half joking, called it Nebraska marble. It was nearly fireproof against the wildfires that raced across dry grass, a real defense in a land where fire could outrun a galloping horse. But rain turned that same roof against them. A hard storm could leak mud through the ceiling for days afterward, dripping onto beds, tables, cradles. The walls, alive with grass roots, bred insects no family could fully keep out. None of it worked without 2 people. The law itself assumed a household, not an individual. A homestead claim leaned on a wife's labor as surely as a husband's, whether the paperwork said so or not. She hauled water, tended livestock, preserved food for winter, and often worked the fields beside him at planting and harvest. He built, plowed, and broke sod that had never once felt a blade. Neither survived alone out here, and still, so many failed. Historians estimate that somewhere between 40 and 60% of homestead claims were abandoned before anyone ever proved them up. The exact figure disputed, but the pattern unmistakable. The land hadn't changed its terms since before anyone arrived. Drought, fire, blizzard, and plague were not occasional disasters here. They were the baseline conditions any couple had to plan for, season after season, year after year. Fire was the fastest killer. In tall, dry grass, driven by prairie wind, flames could outrun a galloping horse. A wall of orange could appear on the horizon at breakfast and reach the barn by noon. Couples fought back with soil, not water. They plowed wide, bare strips called fire guards around house, barn, and field. Trenches of dirt no flame could cross without fuel to feed it. When that wasn't enough, they lit their own fire first. A controlled backfire, set against the wind, burned a buffer zone toward the oncoming blaze, starving it before it arrived. Their sod houses, built from stacked turf, had one accidental gift. Dirt doesn't burn. A soddy that dripped mud in every storm became, in a wildfire, nearly indestructible. But fire was not the strangest enemy. In 1874, a shadow crossed the sky over Kansas and Nebraska. Not a storm cloud, but Rocky Mountain locusts, arriving by the billions. The largest recorded swarm, in 1874 to 75, is estimated at roughly 198,000 square miles, an area larger than California, carrying an estimated trillions of insects. Witnesses said it blotted out the sun. They stripped a field bare in under an hour. Wheat, corn, garden vegetables, gone to the roots. Then, with nothing green left, the locusts started eating everything else. They chewed curtains off windows. They stripped paint from wagons. They gnawed the wooden handles off axes and hoes, leaving families with tools they could no longer hold. With crops destroyed and larders empty, some families ate the locusts themselves, roasted, boiled, ground into a grim kind of flour. Survival meant swallowing your revulsion along with your pride. But the plague did something drought and fire rarely had. It forced the household outward. Families petitioned state legislatures and Washington itself, and relief commissions began shipping food, seed, and clothing to the stricken plains. It was an early lesson the Prairie kept teaching. No single homestead, however well run by however devoted a couple, could outplow an ecological disaster alone. Survival required neighbors, and eventually, government. By 1877, the swarms finally broke and did not return at the same scale. But the plague years had rewritten frontier habits. Root cellars stocked deeper, seed reserved in secret, trust extended further than blood or marriage. Fire and locust taught the same brutal arithmetic. The household was the first line of defense, but never the last. Every couple on the prairie learned to look past their own fence line for survival. But summer's monsters were nothing next to winter's. On January 12, 1888, the plains woke to unseasonable warmth. Coats stayed home. Children ran to school in shirt sleeves. By afternoon, the sky would turn, and warmth would become the trap. Within hours, temperatures collapsed by tens of degrees. A gentle afternoon became a shrieking whiteout. Wind chill plunged below zero. Visibility dropped to inches. It became known as the schoolhouse blizzard, the children's blizzard. Teachers faced an impossible choice: keep students huddled in a thin wooden schoolhouse, or risk the walk home through a storm that erased the world. Many chose to move. Some paid for it with their lives. One Prairie teacher is remembered for tying her students together with rope, a human chain against the wind, leading them step by step through blindness toward shelter. The exact details are debated. The instinct behind it was real. By most counts, around 235 people died that day, many of them school children caught between classroom and home. The toll remains disputed. What isn't disputed is how fast a warm morning turned lethal. 8 years earlier, another Dakota winter had already tested a family's limits without a single dramatic storm. Just months of them, one after another, with no end. The Ingalls family, homesteading near De Smet, lived through what became known as the Long Winter of 1880 and 1881. Blizzard followed blizzard for months, nearly without pause. Trains carrying coal, food, and mail simply stopped running, buried under drifts that swallowed the tracks. For weeks, then months, the town of De Smet was cut off completely from the outside world. With coal gone and firewood scarce on the treeless plains, families twisted dry hay into tight sticks, burning grass itself just to survive the night. It was slow, back-breaking work for a few hours of warmth. When the store's wheat ran low, they ground it by hand, kernel by kernel, turning a coffee mill into a grist mill just to keep bread on the table. Survival became a daily improvisation, invented from nothing. That same brutal decade, the winter of 1886 into 1887, delivered a different kind of reckoning, not to farmhouses, but to the open range, where cattle had grazed unsheltered for a generation. Ranchers called it the Great Die-Up. Blizzards and brutal cold killed between 50 and 90% of open-range herds across parts of the northern plains. Free-range ranching, unfenced and unsheltered, effectively ended that winter. Cold killed bodies. Isolation worked more slowly, gnawing at minds. Wives especially, confined for months inside sod walls with no neighbor in sight, described in letters and diaries a hollow, chronic loneliness settlers came to call Prairie madness. No single family could outstubborn a season like that alone. Word of a stranded household, once the storms broke, sent neighbors riding out with wagons, hay, and spare grain. The same cooperation that had answered fire and locust, now answering the cold. But cooperation could not outrun the climate itself. By the 1890s, a prolonged drought settled over western Kansas and Nebraska, and thousands abandoned their claims. Settlers coined a bitter epitaph: "In God we trusted, in Kansas we busted." The failure was written into the law itself. 160 acres, the standard homestead grant, had been sized for wet Midwestern farmland, not for country where rain might not fall for years at a time. Congress finally admitted the mismatch. The 1904 Kincaid Act quadrupled claims in Nebraska's sandhills to 640 acres, a tacit confession that the original grant could never sustain a family on dry land. It was a lesson learned generation by generation, each failed claim teaching the next family what the land would and would not forgive. The frontier did not reward stubbornness alone, it rewarded adjustment. 3 decades later, the land itself turned against the very methods meant to tame it. Overplowed soil, stripped of native grass, had nothing left to hold it down when the drought of the 1930s arrived. The result was the Dust Bowl, towering black blizzards of soil that buried fences, choked lungs, and blotted out the sun at noon. It was drought, bad farming, and economic collapse arriving all at once. An estimated 2.5 million people left the Plains states over that decade, the largest migration in American history, driven by a single environmental disaster. This time, the response came from Washington. Franklin Roosevelt's Prairie States Forestry Project planted shelter belts, long rows of trees stretching for miles to blunt the wind and hold the soil in place. It was, in truth, only a formalization. Homesteading couples had been planting windbreaks and staggering plowing patterns for generations. Instinct and hard experience, now backed by federal funding and forestry science. Across 70 years, the pattern repeats. Disaster exposes a flaw in the plan. Couples and neighbors adapt. Government eventually catches up, codifying what survival had already taught in sod houses and threshing rings. None of it worked alone. Not the sod walls, not the fire guards, not the shelter belts. What held a claim together, year after year, was 2 people bound by law and necessity to the same patch of ground. Marriage on the frontier was a working partnership before it was anything else. 2 sets of hands required by law to prove the claim. 2 minds needed to outlast drought, fire, locusts, and blizzard in turn. And beyond marriage, community, barn raisings, threshing rings, riders sent out after a storm, turned scattered claims into something sturdier, a society built to bend under pressure instead of breaking. That endurance still shapes the Plains today. That story of preparation and partnership against overwhelming odds is still being told in letters, ledgers, and diaries scattered across the Plains. If this history moved you, subscribe for more.